Hello, everyone. This is Lupe Munoz.
And this is Steve McKeon, and welcome to the Leadership Exchange.
For those of you that have been keeping up with us on a very regular basis, we've been out of the loop a little bit. Life gets in the way sometimes, so we apologize for not staying on our targeted 2-week per episode. We're happy to get back on the horse and happy to be with you, and we're going to continue our discussion, specifically expanding on high-performance work teams. Those of you that are current on our episodes, recall the last episode we had was with Gary Baudet, talking about high-performance work teams. We're going to expand on that topic and really talk about today around conflict and within a team. So what is conflict? Is there such a thing as bad conflict, good conflict, and why it's crucial? So Steve, you're going to start us off with a great story.
Yeah, this is a story, Lupe, from some of the team that I was working with over in Germany. And the individual that I'll be referring to was the manager that was given a very specific task to try and figure out how to improve the recycling centers that they were managing for a U.S. government contract. And things weren't going well. And people were blaming each other. He was under the scrutiny of the program, as well as several other people. So it was kind of this blaming why the condition exists, and there was no real ownership of like, how do we solve this problem? And I was really, I'll never forget this. I was really interested in learning what he did to overcome this. And so he said, Steve, I set up some basic rules and I brought the team back together. And the first one was that this is not about anything personal. This is just about a condition or an issue that we have to resolve. And then his next rule was, we're open to constructive challenge. So if anybody doesn't like what they're hearing or wants to say something different, then you take this little stick he had and raise it, and it was their turn to talk. So he started putting these rules in place that really allowed people to start talking about, the facts and then a way that they could disagree on what they didn't find value to their process or to what they were trying to resolve without attacking an individual on that team. And through that process, and the other thing was there was no rank. So all the way from the program manager down to the guys that were actually trying to resolve the problem on the ground, there was no rank. Everybody had the same position going in. So it really, he created this environment, and that's one of the things we've been talking about. Gary mentioned it last week. So all of a sudden, this realm of psychological safety began to creep in, and they didn't resolve the issue immediately. It took a couple of these meetings getting together, but because this individual had laid out the foundation and the groundwork that they could start to agree and disagree on things, they got to a pretty cool solution. And, I had a chance to come back and visit that site about, probably 6 months later, and just was amazed by what they had accomplished. So, that was kind of the first time that I'd really seen a way to bring large teams together and address an issue and agree going in that, hey, we know there's conflict here. Let's not hide from it. Let's go ahead and talk our way through it. And, great job by this individual to lay out these ground rules to create that environment that was needed. So, yeah, that was a lot of fun.
Great example, Steve. Let me tell you a story about sort of a similar thing, but from a different angle. This was when I was a manager. I had some supervisors, and these knuckleheads couldn't seem to align on things. And instead of being able to talk about things, they would come and complain to me separately. Like, oh, so-and-so this and that. And, he's not supporting what I'm doing. And then the other person would come separately and say, yeah, so-and-so, he's not a team player. He's not. And I got these guys in a room and I said, hey, look, okay, first of all, let's understand something. My expectation of you two is that you work together, right? You're not independent contractors. You are part of a team. And my expectation is that you have the ability to talk about disagreements, because we're all going to disagree, right? You don't want a team that's thinking always the same. I know I don't. So that means that conflict is required. And the conflict I'm talking about is not personal conflict, like, hey, I don't like you, Steve. It's around task conflict or process conflict. So it's not going to be personal. It's going to be like, hey, I've got my priority, you've got your priority. Our priorities are conflicting. Like I have some things I have to get done, you have some things you have to get done, and somehow those are not in alignment. So how do we get to alignment? So I told them, okay, look, do you both want to be successful? Do you want our team to be successful? Right. So I started with the expectation, kind of like your story does, the individual in your story, Steve, with the recycling center. And I had already spent a long time talking about other expectations. For example, hey, we're going to be respectful to each other. That was a value that we had as a team that I demanded. We are going to be professional. We're not going to be blaming each other for things. We're going to state facts, and we're going to state opinions, and we're not going to get emotional, and we're not going to get frustrated and take anything personal. So I had to mediate the discussion for these two to get aligned. And in the end, they were aligned already. They just didn't want to talk about it. And it made me realize that I really have to work on a team's ability. And in some cases, I will tell you, I've actually gone in and created conflict from a priority standpoint. And it sounds kind of like sadist of me, but I realized that you've got to create that situation to allow them to maneuver and work through that, because it's like anything out there. I think, like, let's say baseball. It's one thing to talk about baseball in a classroom and talk about like the diamond and home plate and this is the bat that you use and go over all the rules, but no one's going to teach you how to really play baseball until you actually play it. I think that that's one of the things that woke me up to how critical that piece is for a high performance work team. After that, I really focus on my ability to create those situations and demand from those team members that they have to work together. Anytime they come to me with some story of so and so this, I'm like, okay, what are you going to do about it? Well, I don't know. I mean, what can I do about it? Right? They start to go down the bottom rung of the accountability ladder, and I'm like, well, I'm expecting you to do something. So, what do you want to do? I think that that's been one of the biggest things that I realized is conflict's not bad. It's necessary. It's expected. It's just understanding what that conflict really is versus I don't like what you're doing.
Yeah, and I think you said a lot there, Lupe, that's really important. One, not taking it personal, making sure that team members understand that, this isn't about them. This is about the issue that we need to resolve. And yeah, I've heard it mentioned before, you might be considered the great disruptor at times. And a lot of it is that method that you just talked about, understanding that you have to get people a little bit uncomfortable in order for them to become better at solving the problem, right? They either haven't solved it in a way that we feel confident it's going to be sustained, or they just haven't gone to the other folks that they're supposed to be working on with it for whatever reason, right? Some of these internal struggles. And so I think that's a really good example that you describe of, how important it is. And then the ideas that come out of like creating that conflict in, a psychologically safe environment that people can then express that, hey, this isn't about me. He's just brought up something that, yeah, we need to consider. We need to go look at, maybe do a little deeper dive. So no, it's a great example.
It's amazing to me. It really is amazing to me how many people have a problem with that, have a problem talking about disagreement with something and struggle with the ability of voicing that disagreement in a productive manner. And so I think, when I really think of the ability to have a team that can, I guess, have positive conflict. And again, positive conflict I would define as conflict that is related to a task priority, a process difference, and just a different opinion, but being able to get to a maybe not a win-win all the time, but definitely get to a good place. where there has to be active listening, there has to be collaboration and problem solving. You have to know how to compromise. You need to understand how to do consensus building. I really like when I have an odd number of supervisors or an odd number of direct reports as part of the team. Why do you think that is, Steve?
Well, if there's a vote, there's a good chance that
Yeah,
you got the tiebreaker already built in there, right? So
exactly. It's much more difficult when you have an odd number, because then they could go and break down sort of along party lines, so to speak, right? Then you end up having to be potentially the tiebreaker. Now, not ideal, but definitely what can happen in that situation. But I really try to push some of those decisions. There's a few decisions that maybe I reserve for myself, but for the most part, I'm gonna push on the team and say, look, you guys need to come to some agreement. But I have had teams where I only had two supervisors, or I had four supervisors, and two of them agreed and two of them disagreed. And so at that point, you really have to walk them through and help them get through the discussion. And it always starts, I feel, or at least for me, it always starts with, okay, let's talk about our values and our priorities first of all. What's our purpose? What are we trying to accomplish? And that really helps everybody understand, because then I'm like, okay, of these two options, let's say we're talking about option A or B, what's going to support those things, those values, our purpose, our priorities? And in your opinion, how is that accomplishing that? And sometimes they realize, well, you know what? It's not the option I'm supporting is not really doing those things, but I really want to do it. And so I'm like, okay, that's fine. We really want to do a lot of things, but we need to really focus on those things that help our team move forward in accomplishing whatever it is that we assign, in our goals and objectives and our strategies, et cetera. I said, because in the end, that's what we're here working as part of this business to accomplish. It allows everyone to kind of reset on that and really focus, because I feel sometimes you get emotionally attached to something and you lose sight of those priorities. And I think as a leader, you've got to help kind of bring the team back to that.
as a leader, also you got to be able to demonstrate that, right? To practice what you preach in those ways. And I think you and I have had enough opportunities to work together, and we don't always agree on things, but we stop and we listen to what the other person's saying, and it, in no way does it become a personal issue. We really try to understand the facts, and I think what's really important with teams is you're trying to teach that mindset and those behaviors in supervisors, new managers, is that you want to make sure that you don't confuse feel like with what things are really like, right? You've got to get to that fact base of what it is that we're working on. And I think what you hit on there is key. You've got to tie it back to your values, your purpose, and your principles that you are working on collectively. And that really helps create clarity, right, for that next round, next engagement with the team. It's okay to be creative as well, so you have to continue to encourage different ways people can bring their ideas in, because sometimes that's part of the conflict is they're aligned with the values, the purpose and the principles, and they've got this other idea that they think will help advance the cause. And so in some cases, finding a way to give them a voice or to help them clarify what it is that they're trying to communicate to the team can really start to resolve some of those conflicts as well. And then I think the other thing you brought up is that you got to remind your team that there's always going to be differences of opinion. It's inevitable, but it's also very useful. To your point you brought up a little bit ago, is that really trying to focus in on the fact that everybody's going to have a different thought around how to solve the problem. And again, if it's based on values, purpose, and principles, the likelihood of getting to a common space to solve that issue and to gain agreement with the team is going to go up a bunch. So I think those are really excellent examples. I know, Lupe, you and I really enjoy, different books and articles. Is there any like readings that you've done recently or that you've been working on that you think would help also kind of with this specific subject of, how do you manage conflict in high performance work teams?
There's a lot of books out there, I'm sure, that help you with how to handle conflict. I think one of the books for me that supported the importance of this particular ability of being able to have conflict was the book by Patrick M. Lencioni called The Five Dysfunctions of a Team. In that book, it tells a story, and in that story, it's a scenario of a business and a leader with a bunch of different department leaders. I think it's a male character. I can't remember, but that's not important. But I'm going to refer to him as he, because I think it was. He's telling the story about this team, and on the surface, you see some people that are, I guess you could characterize as, oh, they're the ones that are kind of stirring the pot. But in actuality, you start to find out that some of the people that are not the pot stirrers, at least on the surface, are the ones that are the biggest problem. But the five dysfunctions that he refers to are absence of trust, fear of conflict, lack of commitment, avoidance of accountability, inattention to results. But the fear of conflict was what really kind of supported my belief that, hey, it's really critical that you have a team that understands and has conflict. I've actually had supervisors or managers be upset about something that they have heard from someone that's so and so had said about them, and did not take the moment and did apparently not feel it was necessary to go validate that that was truly what they said, and more importantly what they meant, right? Because a lot of times I can say something, but what I meant was taken out of context, was misunderstood. So the ability for someone to go talk to, for that person that has, the bad feelings, to go talk to them, it's as simple as that. But there's a reluctance to do that. Why? Well, because I don't want to have conflict. Steve, you and I have had that ourselves.
Sure.
As far as conflict on priorities, right? You have your priorities, I have my priorities, and we're like, okay, look, how do we get to a good place where we try and support each other's priorities? And in some case, they're really in conflict, and we're saying, okay, what do we need to do to go change that conflict? Because the fact that they're conflicting, the priorities, is a problem that we need to really maybe address, versus us getting in our corners and saying, okay, we're going to go blow to blow, not literally, but blow to blow, and you're going to make your argument about why we're not supporting you and your team, and you're going to blame me for not doing things to support things that are in your opinion better for the overall. And so it's very much a situation that I think can happen a lot with teams.
Mm-hmm.
But they get ignored.
Yeah.
And so as leaders, I think we've got to be on the lookout for that and make sure that we are not allowing some of those behaviors, blame or negative comments. Like when I'm mediating a discussion that needs to be had, I start with, okay, what, aside from what are our priorities, what are our goals and objectives, I also talk about, like, what's the intention of what you're trying to accomplish with your position. We're seeking to understand that person, I guess, and allowing people to talk, because a lot of times people want to talk over each other. In reinforcing the idea of, like, look, you've got to seek to understand, which means you need to listen more than you talk. Listen to what this person has to say. Really try to understand what they're trying to tell you. And then they will reciprocate. In some cases, because I'm there, I'm the one that has to be like the referee. Like, no, let them finish. Or, hey, let her speak. And then afterwards, when we get to some positive outcome, being able to reflect with both of whoever's in that discussion and say, okay, look, what did we learn? Because if those people cannot tell you what was the learning point there, what did they get out of that discussion aside from alignment, then you're not there yet, because they can't voice, like, oh, you know what, I realized that all I needed to do is talk to this person. All I needed to do is listen and ask, and not assume things, assume that what somebody told me was correct or was in the right context or accurate. And it's as simple as that, and yet can be very devastating to a team. That book, The Five Dysfunctions of a Team, I would highly recommend to teams. It really sheds light on things that sometimes people don't want to talk about. And I feel like this is one of those topics that is so critical to any team. But if you want a high performance work team, there's no way you're gonna fool anyone into thinking you have a high performance work team if they're not able to do have positive conflict.
Yeah, I think Lupe just kind of taking that back a little bit and organizing some of the detail there. For a new manager, it's easy to overstep as you see conflict coming in, and what we want to encourage is that you need to be proactive, you need to be impartial, you need to observe, and you want to avoid assumptions. That's some key parts of getting your high performance work team to be able to resolve issues on their own. And I think when they do, like when you do need to step in, there's some skills that we've learned over time that you want to address, and we've talked a little bit about some of them here, but just to put them straight forward there, it's speak to the team member individually, get the information from them so that you really understand their side of that conflict. And then you need to also talk to the other individual or individuals that are also a part of this. And then you got to bring everybody together. And I think that's a step people miss, is that as a supervisor, you're working around all the ends and maybe doing a good job listening to each of the folks. But then you've got to have that courage to bring people together and then ask, when they're together, hey, let's reset and kind of look at this from everybody's perspective, and then kind of draw up the plan, get their ideas for, hey, what can we do differently? And then let them go again. Once you get to that consensus, then, let them go and see what they can do with it. And I think that cycle is really important for new leaders to understand, is that you can't just swoop down every time there's a conflict, and you shouldn't be afraid when conflicts exist with your high performance work team, but it's really, being proactive and managing it, and then knowing when you step in, kind of some structure around what you're going to do as you start to engage, and then be able to step back out. So it's a skill set. You learn it, through practice, as you'd mentioned, Lupe, and there are some really good books out there as well that can help give you some ideas. And I really like Patrick's books because he does these stories, and most of them are fictitious stories, but you can a lot of times think about your own work environment, say, yeah, you know what, I've seen that, or yeah, that exists here, or man, I remember when things used to be like that. And so that that's some of the stuff that I really enjoy from his readings, and then the lessons learned that come out of it. I just would say to the listeners here, go out and find your own sources of this information, and just start to see where the alignment is, so that you can start to build kind of this is the basis of the information that I need to understand in order for my success in building high performance work teams. Through that alignment, if you see anything different maybe than what we're talking about, send us a note. Would love to hear maybe where we've missed something. But the 5 areas, Lupe, that we know are required for high performance work teams, I think you'll find that they're going to be the same in most blogs that you check out, other YouTube videos, and it's really just learning how to put those into practice, and letting your teams know up front as you start to have them work together, kind of the goal here, right? The goal in getting them to work together. And really, this one thing about the conflict is going to be really important, to let them know that, hey, we expect conflict is going to happen, and that's okay, because we're going to work through it, as long as, to the story I told at the beginning, we don't take it personal, we don't point blame, we really clearly get people together and kind of talk about the opportunities in a way that's meaningful, and really seek out the truth and the facts of the matter.
I've got a personal story about, and what you're talking about. A lot of times we have talked in our podcast about creating sort of that work family environment, right? Work family. So there's dysfunctional families, and then there's functional families. I'm going to give you an example of sort of I'll call it a dysfunctional moment in my family that touches on this. And that was, one of my brothers. had said something to my sister in a big group that was very mean spirited, and it was a little embarrassing for her and insulting. As part of the family, I could have chosen to say, I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to cause problems between me and my brother. I'm going to kind of let it go. But I couldn't. So I went and talked to my brother and I said, hey, this, what you said was like, what was the intention? Like, what were you trying to accomplish with that? And do you understand the impact that you had? And so I was able to give him feedback about what my perception was and how I think it made her feel. And I asked him, like, how do you think that helps our family be closer? And it was dead silent. And I could tell that he was upset about my question, and he got my point. Um, he went and apologized to her afterward on his own. I didn't tell him you should go apologize. He just did on his own. But to me, that exemplifies what conflict management and good conflict is. You can't fear it. You got to understand that you have to, especially as the leader, you have to uphold those values that you say are important for the team. And I happen to be the oldest of the family, so I feel like sometimes I fall into that role and everything that comes with it. But I think that you have to make sure that everybody understands that we have to hold ourselves accountable. And it doesn't have to be an argument. I could have gone at him many ways, but I just asked him questions that made him realize like what he did and how painful it was. I think that when you talk about a high performance work team or any team, but you're striving to be a high performance work team, you want to have positive conflict. The ability to give feedback the way I did to my brother, I think is important and needed. So, there's lots of ways you can help people with that. You can do team trainings, you can do individual development, send them, to do some type of training. You can train them yourself. You can give them, but you have to give that feedback as a leader, and they need to be comfortable giving feedback to their the people they work with. And then when they do something really positive, you've got to reinforce that. Reinforce when you say, like, I had those supervisors, months later, they had another disagreement. But this time they changed it because I would not allow them to I'm like, don't even talk to me unless you've talked to that person. I said, you already know my expectation, right? And they're like, oh yeah, you're right. And so they went and they resolved the issue themselves. The ability to demand them to learn from what they experience and apply that learning, I think is also part of our role. And how we as leaders create that environment. Like you can't just say things, you have to do things like that to reinforce it.
Yeah, those are really good examples, Lupe, and thanks for sharing. These skills can definitely play into our personal lives as well as either family conflicts, could be coaching, athletics. There's a lot of different areas where these understanding and skills can benefit. Hey, just as we start to close out, let the audience know we got some additional guests coming up next week. We'll be working to bring in a guest that had reached out to us after listening to the podcast and had mentioned they were interested in talking with us a little bit more. We've got some other individuals that have been listening to the podcast for a while now that we've got on the slate. So we'll be rotating these folks in again, looking at different ways to cover being a servant leader and the practice around building high performance work teams. And, we've got some pretty cool stuff lined up. We'll be a little thin, I think, maybe going through the back end of the holiday season, but we'll get at least one more podcast out or two more out this month, and then look for some additional ones coming out, I think, in January. Lupe, anything else before we close out today?
I'm pretty excited about our next guest also. I think they're going to provide us a very different perspective on things intentionally for us. We're looking for that, and I think we've found that guest. I won't let the cat out of the bag yet, though, but would love feedback through our Instagram account or Threads. Any way you can get us a message would be fantastic. We do take that feedback and we do make changes to our programming based on that. But Steve, as always, it's a great pleasure talking to you. I'm glad we're back on this. I feel like we just left off yesterday and we just started talking about it just the following day. It doesn't seem like it's been a long time since we've talked.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you, Lupe. And to our listeners, this is Steve McKeon.
And this is Lupe Munoz for the Leadership Exchange. Everyone have a great day.